thank you all for being here today. As you're aware, yesterday began the Week Without Violence. I'm Dr. Ywca Costa. I'm the CEO of Ywca El Paso del Norte. Our mission is to eliminate racism, empower women, and promote peace, justice, freedom, and dignity for all. Today, we have a very interesting panel. We are going to talk about domestic violence. According to the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence is prevalent in every community and affects all people, regardless of age, socioeconomic status, sexual orientation, gender, race, religion, or nationality. Physical violence is often accompanied by emotional, abusive, and controlling behavior as part of a much larger systematic pattern of dominance and control. Domestic violence can result in physical injury, psychological trauma, and even death. The devastating consequences of domestic violence can cross generations and last a lifetime. Before we begin, I want to share a few statistics that really will center our conversation today. 1 in 4 women have been victims of severe physical violence from an intimate partner. On average, a woman leaves an abusive partner 7 times. From 2016 to 2018, the number of intimate partner violence victimizations in the United States increased by 42%. And there's economic effects related to domestic violence. Victims of intimate partner violence lose a total of 8 million days of paid work each year. That's a lot. The equivalent of 32,000 full-time jobs. Intimate partner violence is estimated to cost the United States economy between $5.8 billion and $12.6 billion annually, up to 0.125 of the national gross domestic product. So between 21 and 60% of intimate partner violence, the people who suffer from that lose their jobs. So it's a big issue that we need to talk about. And oftentimes when we talk about domestic violence, it's women talking to each other. What we have today is we have a panel of incredible men and a woman who have come together to talk about domestic violence. Today with us, we have Frank Baird. Frank, hey. He's the founder of Walk a Mile in Her Shoes, a psychotherapist licensed in marriage and family therapy, and licensed professional clinical counselor. We have Sierra Uribari, the director of YWCA Sarah McKnight Transitional Living Center, which is our shelter for people escaping domestic violence. We have Ernie Herrera, a major sponsor of Walk a Mile and president of the Herrera Group. Sean Olis, Vice President of Operations for Prudential in El Paso, and Jonathan Gutierrez, YWCA Teen Leadership Coordinator and previous YWCA TLC participant. So thank you all for being with us today. I want to start with a very basic question for each of you. Why is it important for men to be involved in ending domestic violence? Frank, let's start with you.
Well, I'd say the thing that prompted me to take up this cause is that men are the principal perpetrators of the violence and the harm. So it feels like we need to do something different. And I think, so men under the influence of patriarchy are conditioned in a certain way. And so this just keeps getting perpetrated. And so we need to educate men to help us know how to do things differently.
Ernie?
You know, domestic violence, I think, is something horrible to happen to any individual. And I think it just is an underlying archaic way of treating people that needs to end. Violence of any kind should end completely. especially within the family, within spouses or within couples. Um, and I could just say that, you know, I was raised to be a gentleman, and you treat a lady with respect, and you don't prey on the opposite sex, and you treat them with the same way that you would treat your mother. And so the way I see that is that if the world lived like that and you treat people like that, that would stop the violence in that sense. I think um, domestic violence not only affects the couple or the person or the victimized, but it affects the entire family. And you create a chain from generation to generation where you grow up, if you're a male growing up in that, you see that as an example, and you think that it's okay for you to treat women that way. It's okay for you to treat anybody that way and be violent against them. And so we, although we might feel anger, our actions are what causes the problem, and we could actually control that action and be adults about it and stop it in its tracks. And so if we end this, it would be a tremendous benefit for society, I think.
Thank you so much, Ernie. Very important thoughts. Sean, why should men be involved in this?
Why wouldn't men be involved with this? This isn't a women's issue. This isn't a men's issue. This is a societal issue. And for men to look at women to think that they're going to stop this on their own without men partnering with them is just, it's irrational. And it speaks to the reason why I wanted to be involved with this, Dr. Costa. When you first came to me, I remember you framed it in a way of, we need the men to walk and to be aligned with the women to get ahead of this. And it's just a no-brainer. Men are a part of the problem. Men need to be a part of the solution, which is why we're aligned with this.
Thank you so much. Jonathan.
Yes, ma'am. You know, growing up, I had quite a few experiences with domestic violence. And I can tell you one thing, as a child, we pick up anything like a sponge. And we become desensitized to the violence, to the experience, and we normalize it, and our families tend to sweep it under the rug. It becomes stigmatized, and quite honestly and frankly, this is generational. And to break a cycle, there has to be involvement on adult parties, in the family unit, in the society, and in general. We have to be advocates for our communities. And you know, when I entered the shelter system, you know, my initial traumas that I can recall, I saw them as normal, like they happened on a week-to-week basis, right? And when I entered the shelter system, it kind of changed the dynamic, because then I had people that were involved in my life that were role model figures. They gave me a different outlook on life. They, in small, discreet ways, kind of ushered me to see things differently. For instance, for one thing, I celebrated a birthday party at the shelter. It was my 5th birthday party. And leading up to that birthday, there was an individual, I don't recall his name, it was so long ago, but he told me, you know, if you do good things, if you carry yourself properly, we're going to give you this. It was fake money. And when my birthday came around, I had some money to spend, and I bought a couple toy cars and a book. And, you know, that's what I carried with me. These are little things, they're little lessons, you know, that you pick up from role models. And this is why, you know, we don't always have the greatest role models in our life, whether it's because of substance abuse, psychological disorders, the list can go on and on. Socioeconomic stratification has nothing to do with domestic violence. Although, you know, statistically speaking, we do see greater people being subjected to domestic violence when they're on the lower end of the socioeconomic spectrum. But the fact of the matter is that, you know, patriarchal conditioning has been very present in any country that we can look at. You can look at India, you can look at here in the West, and these are conditioning forces that then lead to generations of young boys and girls seeing these things as normalized, and they are not completely normalized. This is nothing that we should normalize. And I am eternally grateful for the opportunities that I had, the experiences I had in the shelter setting. that then showed me a different way to live and to carry myself. And I saw caring as a primary outlet for my frustrations.
Wonderful. So Sierra, why do you think men should be involved in ending domestic violence and in this conversation?
I think it's very important that men become aware that this is just not a one-sided gender issue. I think that men can be a part of the answer if there's more understanding within the male community. I think that women, we're raising sons. We have husbands, we have boyfriends, we have brothers, we have we're still surrounded by men. I don't see why men can't be the answer if there's a more acceptance. You know, there's this I guess there's this stigma that women are so independent, right? It was a Destiny's Child song. Women are somewhat groomed to be independent even at a young age. Take for example, even with myself growing up, I too was also a victim of domestic violence. And it is a generational issue. It made me scared of men at one point. That's the wrong answer. I think that we can have healthy relationships as young women, as women getting older in our 20s, 30s. You know, when you're subjected to things like that in your youth, it can make you afraid of a gender. It can make you afraid of reaching out. It can make you afraid of going to work. And there's men all around us. There's men that work at the Transitional Living Center, in which I'm the director of. And even that in itself is a very touchy subject. I think that women shouldn't be the only voice to stop domestic violence. We have to get the other 50% of the population. That other 50% of the population is men, whether it be our grandfathers, our fathers, our sons that are growing up. I do have to go back to Jonathan's point. As a graveyard shift advocate, as a case manager, as I've gone through the reins at the TLC, I too have seen a lot of close calls. I've seen a lot of domestic violence situations following our women. That's not right. That's the place of sanctuary. That's the place of to be safe. That's the place to get settled. That's the place of comfort. That's the trustworthy place. And we've had close calls for different reasons. I think that men have to, the other 50% of us is the male population, and they have to be the answer to stopping and ending domestic violence. It can't just be a woman-sided issue. It's got to be a two-sided issue.
So let's talk about the violence. So I'd really like to know why each of you, why this is like, if any of you have had personal experience with domestic violence, and I'll start by sharing. So one of my very good friends, Anna, I worked with her at Texas Tech. She was murdered by her husband, by her boyfriend, when she went to go pick up her baby from babysitting. She had been in a domestic violence situation for many years, and she hadn't really, like, she had mentioned that there was something going on, but we didn't know the level of violence was going on. And it happened here in El Paso, and it was such a traumatic experience for me, because I had seen her the day prior. I was supposed to hang out with her that day. And then she went to go pick up her child. And when she went to pick up her child, her boyfriend killed her and then killed himself. So that baby then was orphaned and luckily was raised by amazing grandparents. But that's my passion for why I think domestic violence is so, why we need to do something about it and why we can't hide it. Because people don't like to talk about domestic violence. There is some kind of stigma around it. People want to just, let's talk about that behind closed doors. But I'd like to talk to each of you. Is there a specific incident that has brought you to this conversation about why it is that you're involved in issues of domestic violence? And I'll start with you, Frank. Is there anything specifically that occurred in your life or that you were aware of that brought you into this conversation?
I often think of my life as really, really, really vanilla. And like my experience was mostly like a sense of alienation. And at one point in my life, I decided to become a therapist. And it turned out that the local rape crisis center was looking for people to do their hotline. And this was in the early 90s, and the idea of having a man at a rape crisis center was a bit audacious. But I started working there, and it was like this aspect of the world that I had never known about. In my, again, I think of it as vanilla. I like vanilla, but you know, a life that was nothing tragic had really happened in my life. And now I'm in this work environment where I'm finding out that so many people have had very, very, very different experiences than me. And it became the kind of thing where I would go and I would start talking with friends, and then all of my friends would tell me that they had been sexually assaulted, all of my female friends. And this was, again, like this, a whole nother world revealed to me. And it just felt like what you were saying, Dr. Acosta, about it was hidden, right? I had, at the time, I was early 30s. So I had lived my life until my 30s with no idea. I mean, I remember, you know, I would look back and I'd go, oh yeah, there were stories about this or that. But, you know, it was always like afar and not pervasive. This became like, this was the dominant story for most people that I know. And that's, it felt like I need to do something about that, because that can't continue.
Does anybody else want to share?
I want to say, oh, go ahead.
Go ahead, Ernie.
Me?
Yes.
You know, one of the first times I actually saw the what's the right word, the amount of violence that occurs was when I was volunteering at the Special Victims Assistance at the office at the DA. I was volunteering because I wanted to study to become an attorney at one point. Then I saw the light. I changed majors, but when I volunteered there, my job was to basically catalog the cases and put them in the calendar and kind of go through the files and make sure that everything was in order. And I could tell you this was during high school, I could tell you that that's all I saw. I mean, every case we saw was these women beaten up. I mean, just bludgeons at some point. And the saddest part I saw was when we would have the victim come in and talk about and basically press charges. And 9 times out of 10, they were protecting their spouse or protecting their couple and apologizing for them and basically blaming themselves. And I was a student. I didn't know. I just didn't understand why someone would actually do that to someone else. And most of these cases were dismissed because the spouse never pressed charges. And so that got embedded in my brain. And obviously, you know, 25, 30 years later, here I am, and I run into the YWCA. My wife's involved in it, and she mentions this thing, and I said, of course, I'm gonna stand up against that. You know, we have a son, and I would never let my son do that. There's been times where I've seen it out on the streets, and I kind of find it in myself to try to get involved to stop the situation. Obviously, calling the proper authorities, but when you see that, I just think that there's a sense of embarrassment. There's a sense of protection. I've seen relatives, you know, being Hispanic. Obviously, you have people that are living in Mexico, and so to them it's normal over there. And I don't see how that can be something normal. And so As a man, we've got 3 daughters. I want them to understand that this is not acceptable behavior, period, end of story. Because it's got to stop from that standpoint. And if they see an example of me as a man not doing that to their mother or to other women, they just need to understand that that's just not the case. That's just not the norm. That's not normal for someone to be that violent. And so that's just my 2 cents that I want to add in there. But I think we need to stand up and just end this at some point pretty quickly.
So I think it's really important to state that yes, there's the machismo, right? The machismo that's involved in this, but also this occurs in every nationality. Like, this is not a Latino thing. This is not an African American thing. This is not a white thing. This is just a thing, and it is something that occurs throughout various ethnicities. And I think it's very important that, and the other thing that's really important, it doesn't matter what your socioeconomic background is. We've had people who are attorneys, vice presidents of banks live in our transitional living center. And so domestic abuse actually occurs in every economic background within our society. And so I don't know if somebody else wants to talk about their like how this is personalized for them and why. Jonathan, I know you wanted to say a few things.
Yes, ma'am. So I'll start off by saying I had both my grandparents in the military, and they both served in Vietnam, and they both came back with PTSD, right? And they both had loving wives, my grandparents, my grandmothers, that loved and cared for them through their disease, through their mental health problems. And I think mental health issues are stigmatized, and we don't even have, anywhere near the number of clinicians that we need for our society. So in large respect, it is hugely a societal issue. And I think in our country and in the world right now, violence is glorified and propagated. We see it everywhere. We see it in television, in movies, in video games. There's various small amount of light that gets shed in society that kind of tries to reflect mindfulness and compassion towards one another, right? These are things that they're far and in between, and it's hard for a young person to break that cycle if they don't have those experiences constant. We're human beings. We need to be reminded. We are very forgetful creatures, and we are easily conditioned by our environment. It's all that nature versus nurture, and I think our environment has a lot to do with it. So like my grandparents, for instance, there was a couple of issues regarding one or both of my grandparents' PTSD. They would have episodes. They would start hitting my grandmother, right? And their grandchildren, my uncles, my dad, my mom would see it, and that carried over into my life, right? This is generational. This is a negative feedback. This is a very cyclical, and it's hard to break if we don't have agencies like the YWCA or the Child Crisis Center to step in and to say, we can change that dynamic for that kid. For however amount of time that we have that opportunity, we can do so. That is within our power, that is within our agency. And besides mental health, substance abuse is huge. Sexual assault falls. I mean, it's like a domino effect, right? One leads to another, and then the dominoes fall. And it's very sad. It's very sad, but it really boils down to what we value. And right now, in hindsight, in our country, we value and we glorify violence, and we glorify the degeneration. I'm not saying we actively glorify it, but it's accepted, right? We see it in our movies, we see it in our television. It's propagated, and we become desensitized to it. And we have to be there to remind ourselves and each other that no, this is not right. This is not how we should carry ourselves. And there are other ways of being, and other ways of acting, and other ways of interacting with one another. So that way we can break those cycles of mental health stigma, and substance abuse and sexual assault, because it is a domino effect, and one leads to another, and that's how that's as much piece as I can speak on it.
Well, thank you. I think your personal story is really important to this conversation because there is so much that comes from our personal stories that really defines the work that we do, and not only the work that we do, but the things that we're passionate about. Sean, I don't know if you or Sierra wanted to add to that statement. Sierra, go ahead, Sierra.
So I do have to go back to that. This is a generational thing. It's really hard when you grow up in family violence not to think that that's not normal. And I'll just briefly share my background. I cannot say that I remember a happy time in middle school or high school. My grandparents raised me. And there was very tumultuous relationship. I don't even know who my own father is. I have his last name and I'm very proud of my last name, and I will not change my last name, but I don't know who that man is for different reasons. You know, just a long story short, you know, my grandfather was military and he had PTSD, and he would have violent episodes. One day I would wind up against the wall. One day I'd wind up glass against my head. One day there would be glass all on the floor. And it was uncontrollable with his diabetes and his PTSD and his drinking problems and all of those things, and couple that with my grandmother's. Very, very tumultuous. When you grow up in violence every single day and you are waking at 2 o'clock in the morning for a violent event, or you're waking at 6 o'clock in the morning, or you come home from school, nothing's on the stove and there's just violence going on, it's hard to not think that that's not normal. Where my passion arises from is I had my own story of homelessness when my grandparents passed away. I buried one at 15 and I buried the other one at 17. That was it. I was on my own. My sister we were both out in the world. We were flailing out there in the world. What else were we gonna do? We really had to dig ourselves out and make sure we didn't go into the life of drugs and the life of promiscuousness and the life of being with terrible people. It took years to get out of that. It took years to know that an education is important. It took years to know those types of things. But if you grow up with violence every single day for years on end, you think that's normal, and you're going to think that it's normal to be treated that way from a boyfriend or husband later on. I'm in a healthy relationship now. Was I in healthy relationships in my 20s? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. And those are very painful to share. It's very painful to talk about domestic violence and dating violence and sexual violence and family violence. It's extremely painful. But the thing that triggers me is, I will say, the YWC gave me two of the greatest jobs in the world. The first one, of course, being director, right? But the second one was my first salary job as a youth advocate. And I loved that job because I was there for youth between the ages of 7 and 17 years old. It starts when you're young. If I wasn't involved in those healthy relationships at Chapin High School, and I thank God for the people my teachers and all the support that I had there, I don't really know where I would be. You know, young women like myself, we're put on this pedestal to just be about our curves and hypersexualized and all that stuff. I have a brain. I want to use my brain, but I don't know that I can use my brain growing up in a terrible household. It's all generational. And talking with my mother and my uncle and some other family members, it carried through. My grandfather was violent in the 70s, in the 80s, in the 90s, and up until his passing. I'm very grateful for my grandparents, and I love them dearly, and I'm glad that they were there for me. But the things that me and my sister had to see, I don't think that was exactly fair. We could have turned that other way and been hatred toward, hated the world. But it's hard not to hate men it's hard not to hate men when you're choked out every day, right? Or when there's, this tumultuous violence. And I didn't know that the answer to that was because of his PTSD, because of his uncontrollable diabetes, because of his own issues. I never knew that. That's point number one. And point number two, I don't even have a positive male role model. I do, that's my uncle, but I don't have my father. I don't know who that man is. And, I don't want that to happen to my son, me and my husband, Nicholas Cox. He himself too, he also had a violent household. I had another friend of mine in high school, a violent father on graduation day in June 2005. We can't even graduate high school and have a happy occasion. We have to be on a drinking rage and and kick, your mother in the stomach. Again, it needs to stop. But I think that it's it's hard for women to talk about it because, one, we are creatures of independence. We don't want to depend on anyone else. We want to depend on ourselves. But that stuff re-triggers us. It re-triggers us, and it brings back painful memories. And then, it's sometimes it's just not a fun way to go. I think that a lot of us need to, realize it's okay. But my own story of violence is, middle school and high school. If I could forget about those days, I definitely would. And I went into homelessness and when I was 17. And you could really turn the cheek of the streets, or you can turn the cheek of college. So there's a hard road sometimes there. But that's without going into more graphic details.
Well, you know what? I'm really glad that we talked about this, because one of the things that I'd like to move our conversation into is what we're doing now for domestic violence. So everybody knows we have a transitional living center, and I want to kind of start with Sean. So a few years ago, we heard about this thing called Walk a Mile, and YWCA decided to start that. And why is that? And so I came to the YWCA about 3.5 years ago, and one of the things that happened 3.5 years ago is HUD stopped funding transitional living centers. They decided no more funding to transitional living centers. They're gonna do rapid rehousing. They're gonna go roof over your head. That's the number one priority. And so transitional living centers just completely lost funding. So a lot of transitional living centers failed to survive. Many of them had to convert into something else. The other thing that happened was that VAWA, which is the Violence Against Women Act, was also not reauthorized during that time. So we lost funding from HUD, and then VAWA was not refunded or reauthorized. And so our transitional living center in El Paso suffered tremendous loss. And so when I first came on, we had this Walk a Mile event, and we just said, you know what, we need help. And so I reached out to a few men in our community that I knew, and that I thought that I could actually engage in this conversation. And one of those individuals that I went to, one of the first individuals that I went to, was Sean Olis. And so, Sean, I want to talk to you about Walk a Mile and why you decided to come on board with Walk a Mile, and kind of where that's led you in terms of your involvement.
Yeah, the real story is Dr. Acosta is a great salesperson, and she's hard to say no to. But on top of that, what I knew about Walk a Mile for years prior, before being asked myself, is I had seen there was an event that men put red high heel shoes on, and I had seen that it raised money for a certain cause that I wasn't really well aware of. In my own machismo, I guess you could say, being a native El Pasoan, I always said, why would anybody subject themselves to that? Why would any man go put those red high heels on and walk around like that, not knowing what the real cause was? And I think over the years, what I've seen is, once you learn what the Transitional Living Center is about, once you hear the multiple stories that are out there across the board, I'll speak on behalf of Ernie, and I think I can hear the Ernie and myself and the other men from the Men's Advisory Council. It engages you, and it pulls you in to do more and to be better, and to help meet that need more every year. We're a competitive group. Dr. Acosta knows this. 3 years ago, we set a record for money raised. Last year, we said we can beat that. This year, we're saying we can beat that, because we want to make more of an impact. And if all it takes is putting some red high heels on and walking very ungracefully to create that awareness, and to be able to put that cause out there on a platform that can get others to support you and donate, that's the least we can do. That's really very little for us to do with the amount of effort that it takes to bring in the money to help support the Transitional Living Center. So myself, I've got I've got 2 daughters and a goddaughter and a wife and a sister and a mom. And, you know, I personalize it myself. And when you hear the stories like Frank talked about and everybody else talked about, when you hear the stories and so many people that are impacted by this, it's just hard. It's a cause that's hard not to get behind. There's way too many people that have been impacted. And if we can have any impact, if we can have the slightest impact on reducing those numbers and making society a little bit better with less of this, if not stopping it altogether, then we should get all behind it.
Absolutely. You know, Sean, I won't forget when you went to Socorro Independent School District Board of Trustees and you did a presentation. You want to talk a little bit about that presentation?
Something I never expected to do. Again, Dr. Acosta is a great salesperson, and she said, we need to go talk to a school district. Will you join me? I'm sure. And we'll be doing it in red high heels. Why not? So you've got the superintendent for the school district and the full board, and they saw us coming. I mean, I'm for those that don't know me, I'm a big guy. I'm 6'3", and you can't miss me walking into a room. So I walk into the room, and then we put these red high heels on. And they're having a full board meeting up front, but all their eyes are on me. And I don't know how effective the meeting was to that point, because they all just wanted to know, why is this big guy over here putting these red high heels on? So yeah, we went up there and we presented to them the reasons for it and the purpose behind it, and shared my own story of I was too proud to put these red high heels on until I figured out what the cause was for. And basically asked them not to be too proud and to put the high heels on with us. And we were very happy when the superintendent and the board all participated last year. And I guess here's a challenge to all the other school districts out there, right? We've got a platform right here, Dr. Acosta, that we have lots of big school boards out there, other superintendents. We challenge you. We challenge you to take the walk with us. There's no reason why you shouldn't. There's a lot of students in your high schools, middle schools, elementary schools that have or may be impacted by this. So why not take a strong stance and make a bold stance and join us in the walk a mile this year?
Wonderful. So Ernie, I want to take it back to you. So you and your family have been, and your company have been some of the greatest supporters of this event, one of the lead sponsors of this event. Talk to us about that. Like, why have you decided, to make sure that you support this event as part of your philanthropic endeavors in our community?
You know, I joke with people and I tell them, I said, I do this because Nora told me so, my wife. But the reality of it is that I think we as men, if we put these shoes on, and if you don't mind, I'm gonna do this right now. I put these shoes on and sit here with my high heels around the office. I actually, it's a very silly way to think about it, but it's also a very empathetic way to look at it. I tell Nora, I said, you wear these every day, and I can't even stand straight with walking in these things. But that gives you an idea of how tough women are. It gives us men an idea, a little glimpse of how tough women are. If you could walk around in high heels on a daily basis, we could do it for a little bit just to feel a little bit of how much you guys can endure, if that makes sense. And so for us as men, it's very easy. I mean, you're born a man, and it's kind of like, you know, we talk about good old boys club and a little bit, you know, being sexist, if that may seem, you know, times are changing. And so when I was asked to do this, first of all, it was very embarrassing to look at it. And when I asked, we have clients all over the country. And so when I sent that picture to everyone, of course, the funniest thing about it is that they all are understanding of what we're trying to do, and getting their support and some of them just said, look, Ernie, I just want to see you in high heels and I'll pay whatever it costs to say, have you in high heels. But the funny thing about it is you guys make it a fun event, but you take something serious and you make it fun, and you involve us men. And the reality of it is that we decided to support as much as we possibly could, in our little world, in the little way we can, and understanding that funding ended, right, and understanding that you don't basically, you rely on the goodness of the El Paso community to donate this, and to fund this TLC center, and I and the beauty of it is that it's not, I love how you guys called it a TLC center, because TLC is something totally different. You give tender loving care to all these women, and of course we want to support that. We want to help as much as we can with that. And so when it comes, we donate for other things and so forth, and people buy cell phones, the new cell phones out, people don't think twice about paying $1,000 for a phone, but why not donate $1,000 to the TLC center? Apple can wait, and so give of yourself a little bit more to go for a good cause, especially during this pandemic. If there's anything more that this has caused, is you lock up a family in the room 24/7 for 7 months. If there's any underlying issues, they're going to come out and the bomb's going to explode. And so we need to support more than anything, more than ever, more than last year, even though last year was a record year. And so I'm asking my friends and family and clients to help us support. Just give a little bit. I know it's tough. There's tough times. We're all in this together, but really, as tough as our times could possibly be, there's other people that are having it worse. And there's women that have nowhere to go. There's women that maybe have lost their job, and they also need to move somewhere, and they will succumb to violence, so they won't have to take their kids out of that home. And so that's, you put all that together, and that's why we're supporting it. It is tragic and horrible thing to happen, and we just need to support TLC and the YWCA to be able to give an alternative and a place for women to be able to come to a home and feel safety, their safety net, and be able to understand that they're not alone, and understand that they don't have to accept and keep taking the beatings. It's frustrating for me to say this, but it literally should be resolved by people donating and helping as much as they can to support the TLC.
Thank you so much. Go ahead, Jonathan.
If I may, I have to say this. I was raised by women, and for me, I in my perspective, I think there's something very therapeutic and powerful in normalizing the feminine, and I think this has to do with psychology, right? We have right, left hemispheres of the brain, one dominant, one masculine, feminine, and we can take this different ways, but I think that, doing something like this Walk a Mile in Her Shoes event, last year was the first time I took part, and, walking a mile in her shoes is not easy. Like Ernie's saying, it hurts. You're like, what the heck? I'm going to go like another block and I'm going to turn around and that's it. But, you come to an appreciation of the level and the amount of sacrifices that the opposite sex or your family, my grandmother, my mother, women in my life have been able to help me to gain perspective and gain experience and something that is feminine. I'm highly in tune with my feminine self, and at the same time, I see myself as a decent human being, as a caring man, and I've had to, and this is hard for my social group, my friends, my peers, because a lot of men, they don't see things like me. So when I try to tell them or to give them some type of shed light, right, to give them an experience that's something that is feminine, something that is outside the range or the scope of their value system, when they get it, it clicks. And I think that's what these type of events can do, is they help us to bridge that level of understanding. Because without understanding, we don't know why. We don't have a reason, for it. I hope to take part in the future in another Walk a Mile in Your Shoes event, because it's a wonderful event. And these experiences of domestic violence, or as the state of Texas likes to identify, intrapersonal violence, right? Or even when it comes to murder and homicide, intrapersonal homicide. We see these things taking place all the time. I think it was 2 months ago, there was a border patrol who killed his wife and he killed himself. And last week there was a Army captain who was murdered, and his partner again. So these things, they're huge in scope. And what agencies or organizations like the YWCA do, the more that we can shed light and bring light to these issues, the greater it is, and the more therapeutic it is for our community and for communities across the nation and for the world, and for young generations. So they start to see, and it clicks with them that, what is good and where can I gain understanding and who can I turn to, right?
Right. So speaking of that, Frank, you came up with Walk a Mile in Our Shoes. This was your baby. You were sitting in your office, or I don't know how that happened. Can you talk to us about the genesis of Walk a Mile in Your Shoes and how that started, and kind of where you're at with that throughout the world? Because I think it's a worldwide event now.
Yeah. First, I want to say how much I'm appreciating all of you and what you do and how the walk fits in with this effort. We started the walk in 2001, and that was pre-COVID time, because now time is just who knows. But 2001, and part of what we did was we were as a rape crisis center. There were only a few men working there. And we were, I was directing 2 years. We directed, I don't know if you're familiar with Eve Ensler's Vagina Monologues.
Mm-hmm.
And, that was a big countrywide event, and people were talking about all these great things that had people involved. And I kept wanting to do something that men could do also, other than just watch the play and learn. And so we came up, there were a lot of outrageous ideas being developed, related to the play. And I came up with this idea, and then I was surprised that people supported this idea, because I come up with a lot of wacky ideas. But our first year we had 50 guys walk. And since then, it's a worldwide event. So we have a variety of like high school kids are doing it. I think the youngest is we had some middle school kids who organized it themselves, which is really impressive, right? It's not like a teacher said, let's do that, though we've had that happen too. But these kids went and they wanted to do it, and it was really cute because they were very shy about how do we get authorized and how do we get shoes and how do we do this, and now it's happening in lots of different countries. It was really interesting to have one happen in Africa. And, so I think of like the red high heel is as like a decidedly Western world sort of artifact. So it was really interesting to see this group in Africa, and they walked in different shoes. They walked in shoes that were, that fit in their world, which was really spectacular. So it's really nice that it's an opportunity for communities worldwide, because I really think of it as community. Like you all have been saying, it's an opportunity to come together. And then it's an opportunity for men to learn about how different women's experiences are from men, right? Like Ernie, when you were talking about being in those shoes, that's one of the things, like, often this happens where, we don't recognize, we just think everybody's experience is like ours. And then you do something as simple as this, and it's like, wow, this little ordinary everyday thing that women might do is really different than the ordinary everyday thing that I do. Like, I don't know if men ever have to think about comfortable shoes as opposed to like work shoes, right? We just get the shoes that fit and feel comfortable. So really appreciating that it's an educational opportunity for men to learn about what's different about women's experiences, for men to learn really that we're in a relational world, right? You know, the idea that this is women's work is like, well, if women only existed without men in the world, but because we live in the world together, it is relational. And so we all have a part to play in this. And then one of the things I was especially appreciating about what several of you were talking about with parents who were in the military and suffered from PTSD, right? One of the things is, I think it takes a certain amount of courage for straight men to go, I'm willing to show up in public wearing these shoes, because that's a real challenge to typical masculinity, right? We all learned the rules about don't be girly. And so here are these men doing this, which is, for some, it's pretty easy. Like I do ridiculous things, so it's easy for me, but it really is a courageous thing, especially some of the places in the world where this walk has been taken up. Very courageous thing. And I think one of the things that can happen with that is that when men get the courage to challenge the rules we've taken up, we've been given because of patriarchy, some of the things that can happen is like we can ask for help. Because I think about how many like people struggling with PTSD, it's not their fault they're struggling with PTSD and they don't mean to do this, right? It's under the influence of the PTSD. So under the influence of toxic masculinity or patriarchy. So it's like an invitation to say men need help too. And so maybe opening the door to recognizing, right? One of the things I really like about it is it's so easy to vilify men as the principal perpetrators of sexualized violence. And I mean, I know how easy that is to do, and none of us benefit from that, right? It's understandable that we take a "you got to get away from me" attitude, and those men need help. And it feels like this kind of an event and the efforts that you're all making, you know, depending on where it is, right? There's this big wide continuum of possible help for people and the communities. And it just feels like it's going to help everybody feel and be a lot better.
Well, thank you so much. We have about 3 minutes left. And I want to touch on a point that you made, Frank, about the different experience of men and women. And I talk about this all the time because I don't know how many men are scared to go into a garage. Like when you park your car, I don't know if men sit and think about, like before you walk out the door to go to your car, a woman has to think about, okay, I need to get to my car. Do I have my keys available? What if something, we think about that all the time. When we walk in a park or we walk down the street, we have to think about what would I need to do? When you go into a room, you have to imagine, where would I leave? What would I need to do? All of these things, the experience that a woman has and experience of a man has is very different in terms of how we view everyday life, like how we decide. And those of you that have daughters, you need to realize that when your daughter or your wife or your sister or your mother goes to the store or goes to the mall, she has to think about where she parked her car specifically, and when she leaves that, so how dark it's going to be and what shoes she's wearing when she's in that situation. So they are totally different experiences. And so I want to thank each one of you for being with us today and for sharing your story. I'm going to look to see if we have any questions on the chat. It says,
mostly everyone's thanking you guys, and I forgot to take a picture again, so I want to do that really fast. I always do that. So before we leave, if everybody on the panel can just smile at your camera. Okay, thank you so much. Yeah, sorry, that's something I always forget to do at the beginning.
Yeah, she does. And so I want to thank all of you for being here. I want to thank Frank. Thank you from the bottom of our hearts. Thank you so much for participating on this panel. It's good to know who started this. I want to thank Ernie for you and your family for always being major sponsors. Sean, I want to thank you for being a part of the Men's Advisory Council. And when I went in to ask, you didn't say no. You leaned in and said, how can I help? So thank you for that. Sierra, I want to thank you for all the work you do every single day to make sure that the women and children at the Transitional Living Center are safe, that they're getting counseling, and they're getting the support that they need. And Jonathan, I just want to say how excited I am that you're part of our team. That is like a full circle moment. You were at our TLC when you were 5 years old, and now you work with our teen leadership program, helping those teens, especially that are at risk, move on. And so we were talking earlier that people don't know all the projects, all the things that the YWCA does. And one of the things is we do the teen leadership program, where Jonathan is actually one of our staff members working with the teens in our community. So thank you all for sharing your stories and for being part of this webinar. I am just, excited about where we're going as a community, because we do have men and that are so committed to Walk a Mile. So for those of you that want to give to Walk a Mile or want to participate in Walk a Mile, yes, you get shoes. There is still time enough for you to register. And thank you to each of you that have decided to come on our webinar and participate and ask questions and listen in to a different perspective on domestic violence. So thanks to each one of you, and we'll see you at the next webinar. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.